Okay, looks like we're good to get started. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. We're excited to welcome you to our webinar about simplifying the management of cloud applications with NC2 on AWS. So in today's session, we'll explore how NC2 and AWS can help organizations like yours accelerate cloud adoption, streamline operations, and reduce costs, all while leveraging your existing skill sets and infrastructure investments. Whether you're navigating a VMware transition or planning a hybrid cloud strategy, the session is designed to give you actionable insights and real-world examples to guide your journey. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to start off with introduction to Nutanix on AWS and the offering that we have from CDW. Then we're going to move on to detailed pathways for migrations, as well as a step-by-step overview of the migration process. And then we're going to move into customer examples and real-life use cases, as well as a demo led by Nutanix before closing off with a Q&A session. So I'll now pass it on to JC to talk about the service offering that we have.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everyone. I'm JC Korean. I'm the technical lead for AWS at CDW. So welcome to our webinar. And can we go to next slide, please? What we want to show you first is how CDW can help you deploy the Nutanix solution on AWS, which is called Nutanix NC2. So our service will include the installation and configuration of the Nutanix solution on AWS. And Nutanix NC2 is used because it's also easy to migrate away from your VMware environment. For those who are concerned about their VMware environment, there is a tool that is available to migrate you away from it. And the benefits are the delivery is completed according to all the best practice of both AWS and Nutanix, and it's a quick and affordable service. So that's not going to be too hard on you because it's not going to be causing you risk. Can we go to the next slide, please? What we require is a landing zone on AWS, access for our team to be able to do the migration and the implementation of the Nutanix and the communication between AWS and on-prem. We have 4 phases. One is the deployment of the solution. The other is the configuration of the migration tool called Nutanix Move, and we're going to test some migrations with you, and we're going to do the documentation. Next slide, please. So it's going to take about 2 weeks for a consultant to do that work, and at the same time, the resource will be scheduled all the time for you during that time, and then you will have a project manager at the same time. Next slide, please. And what we deliver is Nutanix Move and the NC2 cluster that is part of that is the Nutanix cluster on AWS, as well as your documentation, so you can go back and not have an issue understanding how it's deployed, how it works. Next slide, please. That's the legal wording. There's things that we require due to for legal reasons, and that's thinking this how have all required access, because it's hard to do that without all of this. So next slide, please. And the cost is 30,000, but with AWS, you will have access to funding that will make it free for you to be migrated off with that funding. If you don't have access to the AWS funding, that's the cost of of deploying the solution. Next slide, please. And how can CDW can help with everything AWS? We can do assessment services, which are usually funded as well, to help you understand your environment, so you can decide what best way forward is on AWS. But also, if you're migrating away from Broadcom, you can go with Nutanix, all that stuff through with those while those assessments will tell you everything. And then what we do also is training enablement. We conduct workshops. We help you upskill the teams, create training plans, and we do immersion days, hands-on labs with all of you. So, and then after that, we will help you modernize to AWS if you migrate to AWS, where we can use solutions like NC2, like NetApp for your file servers to simplify as much as possible your environments. And we provide managed service. Now, I will pass it on to Mo, who's the Nutanix cloud sales lead for NC2. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, JC. So my name is Mo Allen. I actually work at Nutanix, basically cloud sales lead, basically helping customers throughout Canada as they basically want to move workloads into the cloud. And what we're going to talk about here today, if we go to the next slide, is how, from a Nutanix perspective, we're able to help customers. So when you look at that first question, let's really look at that first question kind of broken up into three different areas. One is, why would customers want to look at leveraging Nutanix, right, as opposed to going directly into cloud, right? Also, from an on-premise perspective. Secondly, is why Nutanix on AWS? What is the benefit to a customer in going in that direction? And then finally, why Nutanix and why now? Like, why would you want to look at leveraging Nutanix now? So I'm going to kind of start with the number one business driver that we're seeing out there from a Nutanix perspective from a lot of our customers. Now, JC did a great job of kind of highlighting it, right? And that's generally basically around the whole VMware and Broadcom, right? And that's what we're hearing from a lot of customers are several things: uncertainty on what their new bill will look like, also uncertainty if they want to still continue down the same path of leveraging ESXi, vCenter, managing VMs in that same format, as well as what are the alternatives that are out there that they can look at to try to replace their existing VMware from an on-premise perspective. And then finally, if they were to replace their existing, on-premise VMware, Broadcom, what are the platforms that they can leverage that would help them to migrate into the cloud? And that's kind of where Nutanix fits in, right? So to answer that question of why Nutanix, because Nutanix basically has intelligent workload placement solution to allow customers to not only run on premise, meaning they could take workloads and run their production, test dev, EUC workloads on prem, but it'll also allow customers to run at the edge, right? So it can have full support for an on premise data center. But the other benefit that you get with Nutanix is you can also take those workloads and port those very easily into the cloud. So you can move those workloads directly into AWS. And what are the advantages there, right? And this is another point that JC kind of touched on as well, is if you have some sort of incentive already tied into the cloud, like let's say, for example, you have some sort of a PPA or you have some sort of a EDP that's set up with AWS today, because of the strategic relationship that Nutanix has with AWS, you're able to leverage that spend and draw down on that spend as you start to move workloads into the cloud. So what would that actually look like? If you were going to take workloads that are on premise, and let's say you do not want to move to the cloud day one, but you want to get away from Broadcom, you want to get away from VMware, essentially you could purchase the new Nutanix licensing directly through AWS Marketplace for on-premise workloads. So you could get all those workloads transitioned from an on-premise perspective. So you could move from ESXi and move off of that into Nutanix, which is basically our hypervisor, which is AHV. And we're going to highlight that as we go through this presentation. But what that allows you to do is basically to change all your licensing and then leverage the existing spend that you already have with your cloud provider. So you no need to go through procurement, no need to get additional spend for those particular workloads. The second advantage is now you make the decision that you want to take workloads and you want to move those workloads into the cloud. You already can have the licenses and import the workloads from an on-premise perspective into the cloud. And the reason why you can do that is because with Nutanix's model in terms of our licensing can be purchased directly through Marketplace, AWS Marketplace, but it also allows the benefit of BYOL, meaning that you could bring your own license and leverage that license on premise or inside of the cloud. So those are some of the huge advantages that you get from a Y Nutanix as well as a Y Nutanix on AWS. But to answer the question of why now is what we're seeing from a lot of customers is they have to make decisions on where they're going to move each of their workloads, right? So it's not a situation where you're going to move all workloads to one particular spot. Now it's making decision based off of the workload itself. So let's say, for example, we're talking SAP or Oracle, or we're looking at EUC or VDI, right? A decision would need to be made on that particular workload, and a platform would need to be chosen that could basically support that environment depending on where the customer wants to move it, whether that's on-prem or inside of the cloud. Now we're also, when we're talking to customers, is they're looking at, okay, well, can we find a platform that will support not only our virtual machines, but also containers from an on-premise perspective and inside of the cloud? And that's really the why now, right? Because Nutanix really is, like I said earlier, is an intelligent workload placement solution that will allow customers to run their environment no matter where it's located, right? And basically controlled by a particular platform. So later on, let's say your initiative is to go into AI or machine learning or leverage even some additional cloud native resources, you would have the platform that can support that. Some additional keys that I want to highlight here under services opportunity is if you're moving on-premise workloads into AWS, AWS has a program called the Migration Acceleration Program, or MAP, and there are definitely incentives you can leverage from a Nutanix perspective and AWS perspective to migrate those workloads into the cloud. So that's essentially, why you would want to look at Nutanix, why Nutanix on AWS, and essentially why you would make the decision now to look at Nutanix. Next, we're going to kind of go into more of how that looks like. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges with any sort of migration is basically, several factors, right? How much time is it going to take for me to migrate workloads, right? What is the level of effort? Do I have the right resources or the teams that could support these particular migrations? Some of the other considerations are around licensing. What is licensing going to look like? Because now if you were to move from on-prem and you move into the cloud, will we need Windows licensing, right? Will we need, desktop licensing or server licensing, right? So those are all some of the challenges that you have. Also, will it require downtime, right? So now we're going to take workloads that are on-prem and migrate those into the cloud. What would that downtime look like? And then the next thing is operating model changes, right? So we talked about virtual machines, we talked about containers, but now when we start getting into the operating system, how would we be able to migrate effective and easy with keeping things very simple and easy? And one of the other things too that's not listed on here, but I'll highlight, is customers ask about IP changes, right? Can we keep IP preservation from our on-premise virtual machines if we were to move those into the cloud? So now we're going to kind of go into, what it would look like from a Nutanix perspective, as opposed to what you would have today if you were running ESXi or VMware. So essentially, to leverage our solution, which we call NC2 or Nutanix Cloud Clusters, you have to leverage our hypervisor. So our hypervisor is Acropolis, and the nomenclature or simple acronym is just AHV. right? And essentially what happens is we will take your existing on-premise environment and we can just migrate from ESXi over to our AHV, right? And we change from VMware tools to Nutanix guest tools. And then from there, we can basically move those workloads on bare metal infrastructure that resides inside of AWS. Now, there are a couple factors to consider here, right? And that comes down to the workload itself. So we run specific internal tools or sizing tools to look at each of the workloads. We can look at the workloads separately, or we can look at the workloads as a collective. And what we do is we'll come back with sizing suggestions on what those workloads would look like on bare metal running inside of the cloud. All right, the next question, please. I mean, the next slide. All right. And how we're able to accomplish this, right, is we use a tool called Move. I know it's a very simple term there, right? But we use a tool called Move. And when Move allows us to have is workload mobility. So it allows us to basically move from different hypervisors over to AHV and to move into multiple cloud platforms as well. So this is the process of how we would do it to basically move everything. So you have several options of how this could be done. It could be planned, it could be unplanned migrations. You could do cross-cluster live migrations. And if you're familiar with our solution, we use what we call clusters and nodes, and that's what we use from a standpoint of scale to scale the particular environments. And we could also leverage multi-cloud snapshots to perform this. I think we got about one more slide. And I think we're going to kind of go into, what would be a good fit for everything I discussed here so far. And the use cases that we're typically seeing from customers that are really a good fit for our NC2 solution is basically customers that are looking at alternatives to get away from Broadcom or VMware that would fit into the left quadrant here under Nutanix on-prem to cloud, right? As well as the VMware on-prem to NC2. So those are generally what we're seeing from a use case perspective, right? Other use cases that are great fits are, production workloads, EUC workloads, QA, test dev, disaster recovery, business continuity, data center extensions, right, or consolidations, or even exits. Those are all great fits for intelligent workload placement. So I'm going to turn this over now to Aaron. Aaron basically assists me from an engineering perspective, and he's actually going to take some time here to kind of go through a demo. And then after he's done with the demo, we'll all come back on and we'll address any questions that the audience may have.
Thanks, everyone. So let me go ahead and share out my screen, and then we're going to jump right into a demo of kind of everything Mo and JC have been talking about. And let me just find the window. All right, can everyone see my screen? I think so.
All
Yes.
good.
All right. So I'm going to jump directly into this and just kind of go over a high-level overview of what you're seeing right now on the screen. We're going to start with what does the orchestration for NC2, right? So NC2 is Nutanix's platform in the cloud, right? So being able to deploy, configure, and consume bare metal in AWS, we have to have a conduit in order to do that. And the orchestration layer is this cloud portal you see right here. All right, and what this cloud portal does is with adequate permissions given by the customer, it's able to go in and procure hardware at AWS. There's 11 different node types available for mixing and matching of workloads, and then configure and build a cluster out for you in a pre-existing landing zone, or it can orchestrate the landing zone to be built for you all in an automated process. To do that, you just kind of need to be first a Nutanix customer, and with the Nutanix customer, you'll have access to the My.Nutanix portal. With the My.Nutanix portal, there's actually a chiclet in there for Nutanix cloud clusters. Once you activate that cluster there, there's the ability to then have access to this portal here. And with this portal and a cloud account, you have all the things necessary to be able to start configuring and building out clusters in AWS and other cloud providers. To do this workflow, though, it's pretty simple. Once you're signed into your cloud portal, you'll automatically be configured an organization, and that's based off of your customer presentation inside of the My Nutanix portal. And with that, you would really just go into any of these. Well, I've got several ones. These are all part of our demo lab, but I'll go into mine right here, and I can just create a cluster. At that point, it's going to give you a couple of options to create a cluster. And these clusters are based off of licensing options. One is going to be general purpose for all server workload, and the other is going to be virtual desktop infrastructure for running VDI workloads. At Nutanix, we are a portable license-based software, so that if you have on-prem Nutanix licensing, you can bring those to the cloud with you, whether it be EUC licensing for VDI or general purpose licensing for just server virt. For this purpose, I'm just going to go next, and then I'm going to do a walkthrough of just a quick presentation on how you kind of deploy a cluster. It goes through the simple wizard where you fill out a few pieces of information that you've planned out with your teams, and we're going to pick AWS. And cloud account. Let me go back to this. There we go. We'll pick a cloud account again. And at this time, it's going to allow me to pick a region. So I'm just going to pick a Canadian West region. At this point, it's going to default to availability zone. No, let's go to Canadian Central. There we go. We'll go to CA1. And at this point, I'm just going to go next. At this point, it's going to give me some options for licensing on Nutanix hardware. We have two options. If you are an on-premise user and you have current licensing that you'd like to port over, we give you the option with the AOS function. And if it is going to be a net new, you just run with the new Nutanix NCI cloud infrastructure licensing. This point, it's going to give you some options for license compatibility with your on-prem if you're migrating from Nutanix to the cloud. If you're migrating from ESXi 3 tier, you would just run with the latest and greatest, which right this time is 7.3. We also have licensing tier options here, and by default, it's going to default to Pro, which I'll leave it at. Ultimate does include the 3 that you see below here, excluding NUS, but we'll give you security and advanced replication needed for some of those more advanced configurations for data at risk encryption and advanced replication for DR. Next, it's going to give you the ability to kind of pick some node types. And as you can see, there's several different node types available here in this region. I'm able to pick any of these node types that are available, and for this, I'll just pick the I4Is. It will default to a 3-node cluster, which is an N+1 traditional clustering for highly available workloads in an HCI environment. So I'm going to leave that there, and it does give you an option to augment that with cloud-native EBS storage if you so choose to. At this point, it's going to kind of give me an overview of what I'm going to be deploying. So I'm just going to say next. At this option, it's going to go through some of the network configurations, and this is where CDW would come in and help out with either creating the landing zone or helping work through all the networking constructs for that conduit to get to the cloud and be able to communicate and build a cluster in the cloud. I'm going to leave it on a function to create, which will allow the orchestration of the cloud portal to do this, but it has the option that if you do decide to build the landing zone out to connect into interconnection of environments in AWS that are pre-existing, you can use existing VPCs. I will just leave it at the create new. Flow virtual networking is an option that we have, which is an overlay network similar to NSX to give the availability for microsegmentation and a security layer, as well as optimization and subnetting and advanced features for networking on the cluster for your VM workload. It is not a requirement in AWS, but it is an option depending on scale and use case. Next, it's going to ask for a couple of features for the cluster VPC, along with host SSH credentials, and that's to access the host for configurations as well as troubleshooting. I'll just put in a simple slider range here for us to use. And then we're off to the races. There's a couple of additional access policies here that are addressed for just doing basic configurations. as well as access. We're going to create an new key pair. We'll do this one, demo, and generate. And then we're going to say next. This is going to give you an option to protect your cluster. So this would be an option if you were going to only have one cluster in the cloud to run all of your production. You'd want a safety net in another region or another availability zone. You can enable cluster protect. It does have some caveats when it comes to advanced replication as it removes that feature. So most of the time we leave it as I will protect myself and go through native DR functions and workflows. So I'll leave it at next. And at this point, it's just going to give me an overview of what's been built or going to be built. And then it's going to check the quotas and make sure I have enough in my account to build it. And when I hit create here, it's going to go out and start building the cluster. Now this cluster will be built in about 45 to 60 minutes. And at that point, you'll have access to this launch Prism element. Now, because I'm doing a quick demo, I've kind of built this out like a cooking show. So I've got a cluster already built here, and we're going to jump back and look in my portal view. And we're going to look here, and we'll see a cluster that I've got built here that's called AWS HPOC 3686, and it's running in AWS Oregon. And if we go over here, we'll jump into my Prism Central instance that I've built out, and we'll notice that the cluster's name is AWS HPOC 3686. So this cluster is running in AWS Oregon, and we've got some workloads running on here. We've got several apps that are built out. I have Prism Central scaled out here, and then I have the elusive move utility tool that we discussed earlier on the call with JC and Mo. That is our migration path from AWS, from ESXi to AWS and NC2. I've also got over here an on-prem environment of ESXi that everyone is probably familiar with. As you can see, we've got several workloads on here that are all set up, and these are all a test environment that we have for doing move migrations. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you the overview of move, and we're going to set up a quick migration plan and then move a VM to AWS from Phoenix Data Center on ESXi to AWS. This is the move appliance that JC and Mo discussed earlier, and this is what we use primarily to help customers de-risk the migration from ESXi to AHV and to Nutanix. This application is actually deployable in an OVA. It can be deployed on the source or the target side. Most of the time we do it on the target side just to make sure that it's got connectivity back. This one happens to be deployed in the AWS cluster as we saw earlier. And I've already got it pre-configured with a couple of environments set up. I've got the cluster that we're going to be migrating to. And this one will just need to be replaced, and we should see the other VMs that are on there. And then I have my on-prem environment here, which is the vCenter environment right here. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through a migration plan, and you can see I've got one already pre-staged and ready to go. But for customers looking to de-risk and move quickly into NC2 and into AWS, this tool will automate that process and give them the ability to move workloads seamlessly and automated and de-risk that quickly. So move to AWS test. Once you have everything configured, obviously there's a lot that's behind the scenes on this with network connectivity, but once the network connectivity is there, the appliances are built, the cluster's up and running, and things are configured and ready to receive workloads. It's as simple as just walking through this migration plan. And the migration plan is going to ask you for your source target, which we're going to look at an ESXi target on-prem. And then we're going to select our AWS target, which is running in Oregon. There's a few other things that it's going to ask for, but the main one is just picking the cluster you're going to and the storage container. Next, it's going to go ahead and it's going to go out and query the inventory based off of what its ability is to see into vCenter. This does require some admin level access to your vCenter server to see this in the inventory, but I think if you guys are all doing all this stuff anyways, you're going to have that access. So we can look and we see I've got a couple of demo VMs here right now. I'm going to go ahead and grab this demo 2 and click next. At this point, it's going to do some network mapping. So it sees my source VM network there. It can actually see my network that is configured on my cluster. So I'm going to select that. It also gives you an option to create a test network, and that can be a completely isolated, or it can be a routable network that you can use to test and validate workloads in the migration plan prior to moving them. Again, de-risking your migration from ESXi onto AHV. Next, it's going to go out and check the target cluster and make sure you've got resources. At this point, it's going to inventory the cluster and check and make sure that there's plenty of capacity for anything that you're going to bring over in this migration plan. And then it's going to proceed with the next steps for configuration. At this point, as Mo mentioned before, it does all the automation of removing VMware tools, installing Nutanix guest tools, which is our version of VMware tools, the drivers that are necessary for AHV to function, see the NICs, drives, OS, all the proprietary HAL layer that is in the VMware, in the VMs. When it does this, it does need a few things. Windows-based machine, it's going to need an admin level account there to uninstall the VMware tools and install the VMware tools, but it also gives you the function to do a manual process if you want to stage some of the stuff. You can do manual and actually do the installations yourself prior to that. A lot of our customers, for the ease of use as well as validation checks, will stay with automatic. And at that point, you just need to add in a credential for the VM to use for this. And there's also the ability to add post-migration automation. But we'll see next, as we're trying to just go through this quickly. At this point, it's going to give me some options for the migration where you have priority, and that's based off of how quick you want to have this moved over in the snapshot intervals to take priority over other migration plans. I'll leave it at the default, which is medium, and then we'll just leave it at default time zone. It's going to default to the target location. There are some other features here for advanced configurations with retaining of Macs, which is great for licensing of some older legacy applications, as well as some other features here that might be necessary for your migration plan. We'll hit next. At this point, it's going to go and just validate that password that I put in there. At the same time, while this is validating this password, I've got the Move 01 VM already staged. And just so we can validate that this is the VM that we're going to move over, I'm going to log in and we're going to put a quick file on there so that when we move it, we know that we've moved this VM. So let's see what we got on here. So I've got to move to AWS. Let's put move to AWS with CDW. And let's just check that file is there, and there it is. We got that file there. So we'll exit out of here and we'll close that. And we'll come back to this migration plan. After it validates everything, all you do is you hit save and start, and it's off to the races. At that point, it's going to start validating your plan and creating those snapshots and staging those and seeding those to your target location in preparation for you to do a cutover. In traditional baking show fashion, I already have one ready to go, which is that test demo one that we just put that file on. We're going to go ahead and cut that over and move it to AWS now. So this is the process that you would be using for moving workloads over and migrating them. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to say cutover. It's going to give me a little warning here. And what it's going to do when it does this cutover is it's going to essentially shut down the VM on the source side, replicate the last Delta snapshots and metadata over to the target location, disassociate the network adapter from your vCenter environment so that if it does accidentally get powered up after migration, there's not an IP address conflict or DNS conflict with multiple VMs on the network. And then it's going to add a note for all admins in vCenter to be able to know that this was migrated at a certain time and where it was moved to. We're just going to hit and continue. At this point, it's cutting over. We'll do in progress. This should give us, there we go. It's going through the final sync of data. It's installing the device drivers. And when it gets to the target side, it will do the removal of the device drivers. This migration tool does not impact anything on the vCenter side. It only powers down this. So essentially it's moving it, but it's really just copying it. So there's no risk in migration of workload. You always have your original copies staged and ready to be powered up if necessary or for archival purposes on your on-prem environment. So we'll give this a couple of minutes and we should be able to start seeing this VM pop up over here in just a minute. Sync in progress. That's the one we just did, configuring. So it's configuring the target on the VM. So we should be able to see this over here shortly. There we go. There's the VM coming up on this side. It's going to go through a couple of stages where we mentioned earlier. Once it's up here, it's got an IP address. It is then going to do the removal and the install of NGT and VMware tools. So we'll look here and it's set in power state. So we should go over to here and we should be able to see that power down. And if we look at this VM, we now have a migrated to Nutanix with move and time and date of when it was done. Come back over here. This VM is powered up now. I might be a little early. What I normally look for is this right here to state whatever the OS is, and that's how you know the NGT has been installed. Well, let's see if we can log into this real quick and just validate that this is the same VM that we just moved. And there we go. Same VM, grab the metadata changes, got our new little file in there we put where we moved to AWS with CDW. And this, we've migrated a workload from an Oregon, from a Phoenix on-prem data center running ESXi into AWS running on Nutanix. So I know I've gone over a little bit real quick. Any questions real quick? All right, I guess everyone's able to start migrations then. What scale does this?
Yep.
All right, so I do see this. At what scale does this make sense at? So that's a great question. We've got customers that have moved tens of thousands of VMs with this. Now, this appliance can do up to 25 VMs per migration plan, and you can have multiple appliances running both on-prem and at the source side. I've got customers that have moved, 3,000 to 5,000 VMs in about 30 days. What about on the small side is what I'm thinking about. So on the small side, you'd be able to move, 1 to 2 VMs, 10 VMs in a single migration plan. So one cutover. Like I said, there's up to available of 25 VMs per migration plan. So at a small scale, this could be a good use case for just getting all of your workload in a quick migration.
And for the Nutanix NC2 full solution, it makes sense if you think all your VMs would fit in a minimum of 3 hosts on the AWS side. There's some middle nodes that are quite smaller than others, so that's all depending. That's why if you want to see and understand more according to your environment, please talk to your CDW team, and we will help you understand all of that. That's a bit why we're trying to do assessments to help you understand what is the best path forward for you on that front.
Yeah, David, there's a lot of tools that we have to do sizing. So depending on the scale of your environment, the size of your environment, there's going to be a breaking point on whether it makes sense or not to have, the cluster size running or not. Most of the time, the feature sets that are allowed to be consumed on the bare metal outweigh going into some other traditional means of moving off of stuff. But there is a breaking point where at scale, this is a much more a lucrative option and quick option to move that workload into the cloud. All right, any other questions?
Okay, great. So if there aren't any other questions, I think we're good to close this off. If any of you do end up having any questions, please engage with your CDW account manager and they'll be able to get in touch with us so that we're able to answer any questions that you may have. But other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.